How does an immortal being deal with death? Welcome to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, where Dave Robison, Veronica Giguerre, and J Daniel Sawyer read my novel, Immortal Gifts, to you. I'm Catherine Filliard, and I wrote this. This episode of the Immortal Gifts Podcast is sponsored by me. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. If you've run out of friends to tell, buy the book. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, large print, and audio. I also have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, if that's your thing. Impatient? The audiobook is available at my shop and my Patreon and will be headed to all the places audiobooks are sold. And with that, on to the show.
Scheherazade. Abraham, Brooklyn, New York, December 14th, 2021. Thomas stepped out of the elevator, all black and red inquisitor robes and calm face. His eyes locked with mine. Without a thought, I raised the shotgun and fired. I aimed for his heart, but he made a gesture and Ludwig knocked the weapon aside, causing me to miss. The shotgun fell to the floor and skidded over to stop below the dresser. "Guten Abend, Ludwig." Ludwig closed his eyes and shivered. "How did you find me?" He slipped into a German accent. "I wasn't looking for you," Thomas said. This answer didn't appear to reduce Ludwig's anxiety. Quite the contrary. He shivered and shook his head, shaking off the compulsion, perhaps. "Fine," I said. "How did you find me?" Thomas laughed. "When I saw the police report about a dog afraid of the sun who drank blood and the diseased cat that caused the condition, I knew it was you. Only a soulless Jew would give the gift of eternal life to a dumb animal. When a pair of adolescents posted on my internet forums about a Jew playing violin at a Christmas party and the strangely frightening blonde man with sharp teeth who defended him driving distance from the animals, that only confirmed it." Ludwig lowered his eyes and let out a slow breath. He looked even paler than usual. Next to me, Destiny shuddered. I stepped in front of her and the baby. I'd stay for them rather than run away, as had been my instinct, and I stood by that decision. "Don't feel bad, Ludwig," Thomas said. "It was only a matter of time before someone made an error." He turned back to me. "Eternal life is a blessing and a reward for Christian faith, a gift that Ludwig accidentally cheapened and debased by giving it to the unworthy. I've been trying to correct Ludwig's mistake for a long time," he scowled, "since he refused to reverse the blunder himself." Ludwig stepped between us. "I told you, destroying a magnificent gift like Abraham's would be the greatest sin imaginable. It would be like taking a present from God and throwing it back in his face." Thomas spoke around Ludwig, ignoring him. "He wouldn't even force you to convert. A forced conversion is meaningless. If one cares for true piety, one must respect freedom of conscience." It impressed me that Ludwig was paraphrasing Moses Mendelssohn, but I feared Thomas would be unimpressed with the source if he knew it. "Besides, any mental influence I used would wear off over time." "I'm not arguing with you, Ludwig," Thomas said. "I'm finished with you. You've served your purpose. You served your purpose when you provided the money for us to go to Berlin, and since you made it plain last time we met that the bank is closed, I may as well tell you so. You're not worthy enough to destroy. But you're not worthy of the effort it would take to convince you of your errors. You're a ridiculous, soft, spoiled thing that wouldn't last 10 minutes on the streets, and even less time in an orphanage." He laughed. "Even the adolescents on the internet forums thought you had an unnatural passion for him." Ludwig froze, his body tense. He took a deep breath, then slowly let it out. He said, his voice defiant, "I have never," Thomas snorted. "It's better I don't know. During the Inquisition we would castrate and stone men for that." He shoved Ludwig out of the way. Ludwig stared at Thomas, perhaps processing the implied threat. My fists clenched, and for a moment I fantasized about punching Thomas in the face. Gossip, lashon hara, the evil tongue, is a terrible sin in Judaism. You may not speak negatively of others, nor may you listen to this talk. The ancient rabbis likened what we now call character assassination to murder, saying that causing the blood to drain from the face was like spilling blood. "I seem to recall," Ludwig said, visibly drawing himself up, "that you enjoyed biting me, in a way that felt vulgar. Perhaps you should examine your own urges." His accent was back to American. Thomas looked Ludwig up and down, arms crossed. "It truly is a shame that this country has degenerated to such a point where people like you, sodomites, aren't at least imprisoned. I stand by stoning or burning." Behind me, Destiny said, "Welcome to the 21st century, asshole, where we don't do barbaric things to people just because of who they love." I love my wife. "I must say," Thomas said, in an almost conversational tone, "that I don't care for modern women." "I adore modern women." "Of course you don't," Destiny said. "I hear you're not even a real priest. I heard they drummed your loser ass out centuries ago." Ludwig cringed like he was expecting an explosion, but Thomas ignored her. He stepped closer to me. "I never dreamed Ludwig would have enough spine to reconcile with you, let alone on the very night of the fire that was supposed to cleanse away the insult that is your existence. You should have died, not those innocent children. At least they're in heaven now." He paused. "I'd regret your wife if she weren't married to you. Shameful. The Nazi term was correct. Rassenschande. Racial shame." Time, and all thought, stopped. I could see the nightmarish orange and black skeleton of our home, feel the heat, smell the stench of burning meat, hair, and chemicals. I saw the dark shapes writhing in the fiery glow as the house collapsed in on itself. My vision darkened at the edges to form a tunnel effect around Thomas. Without meaning to, I flung myself at him and wrapped my hands around his throat, shrieking. We sailed backwards with my momentum, but Thomas caught himself in the doorway. "I don't need to breathe," Thomas whispered, amused. He might not, but I imagined he'd have some difficulties if I tore his head off with my bare hands. I squeezed harder and roared an incoherent scream of rage. I'd always thought people were exaggerating when they said they were seeing red, but apparently not. His face floated in a sea of crimson, while my ears filled with a rushing and pounding sound. My vision was still dark at the edges as I crushed. Thomas's smile became broader, and his eyes glittered with malice. "Of course, then I realized how much that must have hurt you, which is why we'll now have a good old-fashioned witch-burning to take care of your current Rassenschande." My grip tightened and I snarled. Behind me, Destiny said, "Like hell we will. Give me a couple of hours in the vet clinic with you unconscious. You heal fast, but you're not a starfish, and we have equipment that can remove fangs, amputate limbs, decapitate." Behind me, Solomon stepped between Destiny and Thomas. I heard what I was fairly certain was him cracking his knuckles. Ludwig stood beside Thomas, watching with worried eyes. I couldn't see Morgan or Bridget, and hoped they stayed hidden. Thomas rolled his eyes. "Modern women. No sense of their proper place. She dies before you. I might keep the baby and raise her to hunt your kind, by which I mean heathen vampires. We can have a new Inquisition, and she can be my hammer." I bared my teeth and leaned in, intending to tear out his throat. He placed a hand on my forehead and shoved me away, rolling his eyes. And then I lost control of my body as Ludwig said, "Play the violin." I stopped. My vision returned to normal as I stepped back, removed the violin case from my shoulder, and laid it on the bed. A strange, cold, calm rage swept over me, like sinking underwater in the ocean in winter. My mind cleared even as my body obeyed Ludwig's order. Destiny watched me with a confused expression, then turned her gaze on Ludwig. Thomas's head tilted slowly as if he were trying to figure out what Ludwig was doing. I could feel Solomon's sympathetic eyes on me as I pulled the violin out and played Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. It wasn't my best playing, as I was merely a puppet whose heart was set on murder. The violin wasn't my Stradivarius either. It was Ludwig's Lohner. But my body obeyed the order to play, whether or not I willed it, and the familiar notes brought me some comfort, despite their icy perfection. "Yes," I heard Thomas say over the violin, "and you shoot him while he plays, Ludwig." His voice turned mocking. "I hope you at least got what you wanted from him. That was why you wanted to turn him, wasn't it?" The compulsion to play stopped, because Ludwig was now compelled instead of me. But I continued the piece, trying to cling to whatever solace the violin might bring me. I thought of the clever and desperate Scheherazade, who told stories for 1,001 nights to forestall her death, and I willed the story to be true, for Thomas and Ludwig to be spellbound. The violin might not have been my Stradivarius, but she was willing to help me. Somehow, it worked. Ludwig froze halfway to the dresser and the shotgun, and stared with a blank expression. Thomas stepped closer, eyes glazed. It worked. Ludwig had told me to bring the violin. Had he known? Part of me whispered deep inside, of course he knew. I had no time to be surprised. I released Ludwig. I willed him to regain himself and spoke to him in Solomon over the music. "Take my wife and baby and leave." I kept playing. Solomon took the baby and Ludwig picked up Destiny. They headed towards the door at vampiric speed. I could hear Destiny in the hall. But, Abraham, put me down. We have to help him." "He can't stop," Ludwig said. "We'll send help." "Go," I said, and could spare no more thoughts for anything but Thomas. If we were still here in the morning, I would lead him into the sun like the Pied Piper and fiddle while he burned, and we'd see which of us went up in flames first. How many men and women had he murdered with fire? Aside from my wife and children, of course. Burning had been the preferred execution method for the Inquisition, and my people had been the preferred victims. They were executed by the hundreds, sometimes the entire adult population of a community. How many Jews and witches had he killed? My wife and children. Flora. The elevator doors opened and closed, but I didn't have a clear line of sight out the open door to see the elevator across the hall anymore. I assumed it was my wife, my baby, and my friends, and I kept playing. I played Scheherazade, followed by all 24 caprices for solo violin by Paganini. I played solos by Bach, Mozart, Vivaldi. I performed Henryk Wieniawski's L'École Moderne, followed by Bartók. And then I looped back to Scheherazade. I played, and after I don't know how long I heard the elevator ding, and 2 NYPD officers entered the room. Fuck. "Sir," the heavier of the 2 officers said, "we have reports of a disturbance in this room. This is the man who had the white supremacist rally in Atlantic Highlands, and he kidnapped my wife and daughter." I called over the violin. "Those are his accomplices. You can call it in." The police glanced at each other. I kept playing. The other police officer shook Thomas. "Sir." Thomas didn't respond. "Is he on drugs?" The heavier officer turned to me. "I'm going to have to ask you to stop playing and take this interview seriously." "I'm sorry," I said. "I can't. Please, he'll hurt you if I stop." He grabbed my arm and dragged me towards the door, causing a discordant scrape across the strings. Thomas blinked, then rotated his head to stare at us. "Sir?" The officer who had shaken Thomas took hold of his shoulder. "I need you to come down to the station." Thomas ignored the police entirely. I suppose he thought they were unimportant. Instead, he smiled at me, a very unsettling type of slow smile that made my stomach clench. "I see Ludwig created something interesting after all. I might have a use for you." "I doubt it." I lifted the violin, and the heavier officer slapped it out of my hand. It landed on the floor next to the bed. Thomas grabbed the first officer and snapped his neck with a loud cracking noise. The second officer pulled his gun and fired. Thomas lunged at him while I dove for the violin. There were more gunshots, and I saw red out of the corner of my eye and smelled the delicious scent of iron. But there was something off about it, almost like it was old. Thomas. I had almost arrived at the violin, but Thomas grabbed my foot, a gun falling to the floor at his feet. It was just out of reach. The officer was lying on the floor beside it, next to the unconscious thug. I stretched my hand, fingers brushing the smooth, sensuous wood of the violin, but he dragged me away. So I seized a table as he hauled me past and smashed his arm with it, hoping to break his grip. The table broke instead. I wished the thing about wooden stakes were true, as I suddenly had a jagged surplus of them. The violin was out of reach, but the shotgun wasn't, so I grabbed it and fired. He dodged, so it hit him in the shoulder rather than the heart. He roared in pain, and I racked it. Empty. Fine. I used the muzzle to bludgeon him in the gunshot wound. He grabbed it out of my hands. I hadn't expected him to be so strong. I suppose I'd never fought another vampire before. He swung it around and struck me in the head with it. I sailed into the wall, hitting it with a loud crash. I landed on the floor, seeing stars, and lunged for the violin. I had to win this fight so my wife and child could escape. Would he pursue them if I were dead? Thomas stepped on my hand, causing a loud crunching noise. I cried out. Thomas smiled, malicious, and stomped towards my other palm, but I pulled it away in time. I cradled my broken hand and glared at him. "Don't be such a child." He curled his lip at me. "It'll heal in under an hour." Outside in the hallway, the elevator dinged, and there was the sound of wheels rolling, one of which squeaked a little. I lunged for the violin again. I could play through the pain. Thomas reached out the door at vampiric speed and grabbed a terrified young woman in a maid's uniform and a sleek bun. "Drop it," he said. I raised both hands and backed away from the violin. "Please," she said. "I have a baby. I'm only 17. Thomas ignored her. "Put it in the case and hand it to her." He put one hand on her head and an arm across her shoulders, preparing to snap her neck. She was trembling with tears running down her cheeks. She struggled against him, but he was too strong. He glanced at the 2 dead police officers on the floor. "Or she can join them." I picked up the violin, slowly, and put her and the bow into the case and locked it. I walked over to hand it to the maid. "Don't hurt her," Thomas smirked. "The violin or the maid?" "I meant the maid," I said. "But both?" He laughed. "The violin is safe. I told you I might have a use for you. The maid? That depends on you and how cooperative you are." He jerked his head toward the door. "You first. We're going for a walk." I headed over to the elevator and pressed the down button, and Thomas dragged the frightened woman with him. Her cart of sheets and toilet paper and cleaning supplies was outside the door. "Please, I have a baby," she said. "Silence," he said, giving her a shake. The doors opened and we rode down. I could see the maid in the mirrored walls, could see her tears. She was so young, so very young. The elevator doors opened. "Go on," he said, "out the front door." As I left, I glanced over at Troy, the desk clerk, with the wad of $100 bills in his sock, hoping Ludwig's bribe would buy me a little help. Troy avoided my eyes. Oh. I didn't have time to be angry. I walked out the door where a dirty white van was waiting. Some men with button-down shirts were sitting in the open cargo door. "We almost came in after you," one said. "You probably should have," Thomas said, still serene. "But I managed, as you see. God is on my side." Ugh, that was what he thought. Had my friends and family escaped? Surely Ludwig and Solomon could take these mortal thugs. Thomas pushed the maid towards the van. She tried to run to escape, but he had a firm grip on her arm that she couldn't break. The young men gathered around her. The street was empty, and they blocked the view of her being manhandled into the van. Thomas looked me in the eye and said, "Get in."
Destiny, New York, December 15th, 2021. We were headed the wrong way. The car speeding through the night. Morgan was driving us back into Manhattan, and Abraham was alone with the psychopath who murdered Abraham's wife and children back in the Victorian era. "Turn the car around. We need to drop off your daughter at the very least, and preferably you as well." "Like hell you will." There was a roaring in my ears that I realized sounded like fire, but I wasn't afraid. "That's my husband, and I'm not leaving him there with that... After a moment of frustration, I finished. "The sociopath who murdered his previous family." "We need to drop off the baby first," Ludwig said. "We can't allow Thomas to use her as a hostage against Abraham. Also," he made a face, "traditionally, vampire-human hybrids, Dampiers, were used as vampire hunters, assuming the folklore is true." I blinked and stared at Miriam. The conversation was too intense, and Miriam cried. I kissed her on the forehead and told her everything would be all right. Sometimes it's a mother's job to protect a child from the truth. Will he be all right?" Bridget asked. "It's all right," Ludwig said. "They're not moving, and when they are, I can guide you to where they go." He shivered, but his voice sounded determined. The roaring in my ears intensified. I could see in my mind's eye the sweet faces of the children in the portrait Abraham had commissioned, and my heart broke for them. And poor Flora, she'd been in the position of my nightmare, the one I'd had even as a child. Some part of my brain could picture the children crying, feel the heat of the approaching flames. The little boy's face was covered with soot and streaked with tears, but he was stoically silent. The little girl screamed. I wasn't afraid anymore. I should have been, but I wasn't. I wanted to see the one who took Abraham's previous family out of the world, taken out of the world himself. Not very peaceful or vegetarian of me, I know, but fuck it. I'm an animal lover, not a sociopath lover. I'd say I wanted to be the one to do it. But I thought it would change me in ways I didn't want to change. If it was a choice between Thomas and Abraham, though, I'd take it.
Ludwig, Manhattan, New York, December 15th, 2021. I'd left Abraham with Thomas. I was sitting in my penthouse waiting for Destiny to return, and my nerves... I agreed with Abraham that denying Thomas hostages to use against him was the best course of action, but I'd left Abraham alone with Thomas, and I didn't know what I'd do if he died. I'd focused my entire life around his safety for over 100 years, but I had been focused on him since 1840. Did a life without him have meaning? At least Abraham had spared me from shooting him. I'd only killed the innocent once in my life, and Thomas had forced me to, using his maker's abilities. I still prayed for that man's soul regularly. If Abraham survived, would he think of me the same way after Thomas's accusations? I tried to remember if Abraham had ever expressed an opinion on homosexuality. I supposed he was a 19th century Jewish man, and perhaps I needn't have asked what his opinion might be. He wouldn't be hateful like Thomas, but he could hardly approve. I would simply explain that I wasn't... Was I? If I'd needed to breathe, I would have been breathing into a paper bag at the very thought. No. It was merely romantic friendship, as was popular in the 19th century. Anything else was too terrifying to consider, and whether it was true or false, Thomas had merely said it to throw me off balance and upset me.
Abraham, Vreschen, Prussia, 2 Nisan 5594, April 11th, 1834. There are gates in heaven that cannot be opened except by melody and song. Attributed to Rabbi Shnoyer Zalman. Dressed for the first time in a prayer shawl, I stood in front of my entire congregation and led them in Shaharit, the morning prayers. My voice was changing, but it didn't crack once during the service, which I considered a minor miracle. The synagogue was a lovely wooden building with black and white tile floors, red and gold wallpaper, wood columns and benches, and abstract windows. Sun shone in bright behind me as the bima, the altar, faced Jerusalem. Jewish prayer is sung rather than spoken, and our cantor had a magnificent singing voice. I was only 13 and didn't have his skill, but I did my best, and my voice was clear. I pronounced all the words properly and hit the notes correctly. Some bar mitzvah boys were mumbling and tuneless, but not me. I glanced over at Rabbi Mendel at one point, and he beamed at me with pride. When it came time for the Torah reading, I took a deep breath to calm my nerves and went up to read from the gorgeous, handwritten Torah scroll, our synagogue's most prized and beloved possession. Rabbi Mendel stood next to me to the side and followed along to prompt me if I got lost. There's a melody to reading the Torah aloud as well. I was very proud to not need any prompting and get the trope, the tune, correct and do it musically. My particular parsha, Torah portion, was continuing the purity laws and included mikvah use and leprosy. We can't all get the 10 Commandments for our bar mitzvah parsha. My 13th birthday fell on the Shabbat with Parshat Tarzia, so that's what I got. Leprosy. And I did my best with it. Okay, it's technically not leprosy. It's a spiritual affliction, often a punishment for being a tale-bearer, or so say the sages of the Mishnah. My father was also called up to read. He beamed at me and had to be prompted twice to find the place because he was so busy being proud of me. Each weekly Torah portion is paired with a thematically related reading from the prophets, the Haftorah. It also has a melody. My Haftorah was about a prophet miraculously curing an Aramite general's leprosy. I sang it and the blessings, and then the congregation sang Siman Tav Umazel Tav to me. It was in the haunting, liturgical melodies of the synagogue that I first learned to love music. Jewish music has a scale in the minor mode that's uncommon in Western music. Western music theory calls it Phrygian dominant, among other things, and it occurs in Arabic, Ottoman, Iranian, and Indian music as well. But when you hear music that sounds Jewish, it's because it's Phrygisch, the Yiddish term, or Phrygian dominant. My mother wanted me to go to the yeshiva to be a rabbi, and Rabbi Mendel wanted me to study with the cantor. But I ended up going for a year of Talmud study, then studying violin and music theory at the academy in Berlin instead. The year of Talmud study was my mother's condition before allowing me to go to the academy, so I wouldn't forget who I was. I never forgot. Abraham, Brooklyn, New York, December 15th, 2021, through December 16th, 2021. The van pulled away from the curb and headed down the street. It was icy and chilly, even though I didn't feel the cold like I used to. I listened to the crunch of snow under the tires, the soft sound of sleet hitting the windows, and the faint sniffles of the maid in the back seat. I glanced over my shoulder at her sleek, black hair, her olive skin, and the tracks of tears. She was so young. I felt a pang of pain for her trauma. I turned my head and stared out the window, watching the buildings move past. My hand ached, but I could also feel the bones knitting back together. Not a pleasant sensation. It alternately itched and twinged, but one that comforted me nonetheless. The bastard was right. If I were mortal, I would have never played the violin again. But I wasn't, and it would heal in a trivial amount of time. I pushed my hair out of my eyes with my offhand, and it came back bloody, but that wound, too, was healing. It would take decapitation, fire, or sunlight to be permanent. Anything else was merely a temporary nuisance. I stared out the window. It had all been for nothing. I'd stayed away from Ruth and Solomon, hoping to avoid gay scandal impacting their social lives, but also hoping they wouldn't notice that Ludwig and I weren't aging. And they knew all along what we were. How could they not know when they'd seen me rescue them from the Nazis? The masquerade had been for nothing. I could have tried to continue to be a part of their lives if they'd have had me, and I'd squandered that chance for a futile attempt at providing them non-scandalous normalcy. For nothing. I'd stayed away from my people, my community. First because I was afraid that I might bite someone, then because I feared my state prevented me from living as a Jew. Finally, out of the misguided thought that I was dead and therefore freed of all obligations. Jewish prayer is written in first-person plural. On Rosh Hashanah, we ask God to remember us for a sweet year. On Yom Kippur, we confess that we have sinned, whether or not we personally have sinned. We list a litany of things that we, as a community, and ask for God's forgiveness. The person standing next to you might have sinned. And not only should that person not have to confess alone, we are a community. I needed to be a we as well as an I. I'd left my performing career for nothing. I'd believed that the public eye and Flora's winking insistence that we were vampires were what caused her death, but it was Thomas all along. Forgive me, Flora, my love. I have sinned against you. I loved playing, loved stepping out into a sunny, warm pool of light and offering beauty in bright, clear, sweet tones, and the response of the audience saying, yes, yes, we hear it, see it, feel it too. The van turned into a darker, more disreputable-looking area. We were headed toward that abandoned warehouse Ludwig and the thug had mentioned. There were few other cars on the road, and no one spoke. I had let the shadow of Destiny's mortality hang over our lives together when I should have just enjoyed being with her. I was ruining my life, both our lives, with my refusal to accept that death was the mortal state of things. Even my kind could die, as beloved Flora's death proved. And now Solomon. He had extensive roots in his community, a family, grandchildren. What would he tell them? Would he have to fake his own death? Would he have to watch their accomplishments from afar as I had with him? I glanced behind me again. The maid was clutching the violin like a frightened child holding a teddy bear. I doubt she realized she was doing it. Next to her, Thomas saw my gaze land on the violin and smirked at me. We pulled up to a loading dock at that point, and Thomas said, "Get out, slowly, and wait. What happens if I don't? I kill the maid. Then I'll burn you at the stake like we did in the Inquisition. I won't even give you a chance to convert first." He smiled, and the expression had a malicious edge. "Although I might give you some much-needed correction first. But no religious instruction, no conversion. As if that were something I'd do. I won't convert." I stepped out of the van, snow crunching under my sneakers. Thomas pulled the maid across vinyl seats repaired with duct tape and stood in front of me, gripping her upper arm. She edged away as far as she could, but couldn't pull free. "Good," he smiled, and his voice was calm. "I should want to save your soul, but you've been such a long-term problem for me that I'd really rather you didn't." He stepped closer, dragging the maid with him. "I'm glad we're agreed," I said. "I'll always be a Jew, just like Jesus." Thomas slapped me with his free hand. "Good." I'd been trying to provoke him. Moron. "By the way," I said, in an intentionally false casual tone, "did you rape Ludwig when you bit him? Do you enjoy molesting pious young men?" Thomas smiled at me in a way that was more a baring of teeth. "Hardly." He rolled his eyes and sneered. "Rape is merely another tool, crude but effective. And it wasn't required in Ludwig's case." He smirked. "Ludwig had other, more efficient handles." Was that supposed to frighten me? It infuriated me instead. I thought of the poor inmates at the prisons where he had been a warden and silently vowed to them that if I managed my revenge for Flora, John, and Eliza, I would avenge them as well. The maid whimpered, tears leaking out of her eyes at an increased rate. "Please, I have a baby and a sick mother. I'm only 17. Please." "Don't be ridiculous," Thomas said to her, giving her a little shake. "You're just a tool to harm him. You'd better hope he behaves and gets up on the stake like a good boy." That was perhaps destined, no pun intended, to be my fate, unless I wanted to obey his orders to, neutralize the police with my playing? Hypnotize others into joining his cause? That wouldn't happen. If I were going to be killed for being a Jew, did that make me a martyr? There were stories of martyrs singing Aleinu on the way to their deaths at the stake in 12th century France. According to the martyrology that recorded the story, people wondered from afar at the melodious strains. Aleinu is the closing prayer of the morning, afternoon, and evening services. The opening line is, "It is our duty to praise the Master of all, to acclaim the greatness of the One who forms all creation." The traditional belief is that the prophet Joshua wrote it on the eve of the battle at Jericho, but some believe it was written by Rav in the 3rd century. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool scent of fresh snow as Thomas and the maid walked away from the van. He grabbed her by the shoulders and said, "Let's go inside. Lead the way." So I did. But I led the way, singing Aleinu. Aleinu might be the most controversial Jewish prayer. There's a line about other nations bowing in vanity and emptiness and praying to a God who cannot save, that was outlawed by our Christian neighbors because they believed it was a reference to Jesus. The line was illegal even as late as 1750 in my native Prussia. In some places, the authorities went so far as sending observers into synagogues to make sure we hadn't included it. Obviously, if Joshua were the author, he was referring to the Canaanites, and the prayer would predate Jesus. If it was written by Rav in the 3rd century, it referred to the Greeks or Romans. We frequently omit this line nowadays, and I skipped it now out of respect for my friends of other faiths, including my wife, who might side with the pagans. Okay, I admit Aleinu was a rebellious choice. I didn't consider Thomas's God to be the same God as Ludwig's God. Thomas's God was hate, and although I eliminated the line, vanity and emptiness. I'm not as good a singer as I am a violinist. I'm adequate, but the notes were clear, and I visualized the Hebrew text in my mind. I concentrated on my love for my people, this prayer and its melody, and tried to sing it as beautifully as possible. And I felt a sort of softening around the consciousness of those near me. I glanced around. They were following me, but Thomas's previously purposeful stride had become a shuffle. Their eyes were unfocused and their jaws slack. Perhaps I wouldn't die a martyr. At least not today. I stopped, turned, and inched over to the maid, being careful not to make any sudden moves that might startle someone out of their reverie. I had to move slowly, practically in slow motion, to avoid reaction. I gently took the violin case from her, still singing. No one reacted, although their eyes remained more vague than fully focused. I laid the case on a tall lip intended for truck unloading and pulled out the violin, but I finished the verse of Aleinu before playing. Ein od, there is no other. And then I played. Thomas and his thugs I had spellbound, and as for the maid, take the keys and go. She blinked and glanced around as if awakening from a nap. Thomas and his two thugs were staring at me, their eyes glazed. She edged over to the man who'd driven the van and snatched the keys out of his hand. He didn't react as she hurried back out of his reach. She gazed deep into my eyes. Thank you. I didn't know whether she whispered or mouthed the words because I couldn't hear them. I nodded to her and kept playing. She ran to the van, started it, and drove away. I began with the repertoire I'd played for Ludwig's company party, then did Scheherazade and the 24 Caprices for solo violin by Paganini. The sky was lightening. I backed away towards the human-sized door at the far end of the building. I would have to stop playing to open it.
Ludwig, Manhattan, New York, December 16th, 2021. Thomas and Abraham were on the move. Destiny handed Miriam to Bridget. "You're on babysitting duty," she kissed Miriam's tiny cheek. "My doorman can obtain diapers and infant formula for you," I told Bridget. "He and I have a fiscal arrangement. He provided me with a monthly snack and I paid his college tuition." Bridget nodded, and we headed to the parking garage together. Destiny was carrying a small pharmacy bag. "You should stay," I told her. Destiny's eyebrows raised and her chin jutted out defiantly. "I'm fighting for my husband." I wasn't certain what she could do. Perhaps something in the bag? I didn't ask. That said, she was unaffected by sunlight, and modern women had their own minds and did as they wished. I wondered what my mother would have done with such freedom, and was suddenly wistful. Mother had never offered an opinion on what she would have preferred to be doing. I supposed she'd enjoyed singing. I'd inherited her voice and had been a boy soprano 1,000,000 years ago, but then my voice changed and became ordinary. I climbed into the front seat of the Subaru. "Just head back towards the hotel for now, and when we get closer I'll direct you." Morgan started the car, and I closed my eyes and ignored the gentle rocking and swaying of the car. I focused on the shining golden dot and the angry dark red flame next to it, Abraham and Thomas. We drove on in grim silence, and they focused harder, deeper. I had the impression that they were in a van, but couldn't tell what color it was. But Abraham was my North Star, and I would always find him. He could board a plane to Thailand, and I would find him there. Not that Abraham would fly anywhere, given the choice. He suffered terribly from air sickness. I smiled and concentrated again on the golden dot. I had a vivid sense memory of the two of us in the candlelight, with him playing, his hair falling over his eyes, his soft lips, and the sound as lush as velvet, brushing over me like fingers. The scent of wine, and the taste of honey. It was almost carnal. Was this romantic friendship, or was I in love? The two dots stopped moving. Turn left when you get a chance.
Destiny. New York, December 16th, 2021. The sun was rising. Ludwig sat in the front seat, gesturing and calling out directions and generally irritating Morgan. Me? I had a bottle of veterinary tranquilizer and a syringe. It would take the entire bottle to knock out Thomas, but I was willing to give it a try. I hadn't even showered, and I promised myself that the second I got away from the thugs with the shotgun, I would shower. We'd left Miriam with Bridget as soon as I returned from the 24-hour pharmacy to get a prescription filled for my anxious dog. I felt guilty about misusing my vet credentials to get drugs, but it was for an excellent cause. I only hoped I had a chance to inject Thomas with it. Under any other circumstances, I would have found Ludwig's directions hilarious. But the sun was rising, and I didn't know if my husband had shelter or not. I was also, when this was over, I'd be more amenable to my husband's suggestions of picking up and moving. Okay, no, I loved our house. I loved being near my mom's, but it would take a while before I felt safe again. They'd invaded my mother's home, the place where I grew up. They'd pointed a gun at me and my baby. I'd have a new nightmare to replace the fire. The fire was still worse.
Abraham, Brooklyn, New York, December 16th, 2021 through December 17th, 2021. I kept playing. We were on the west side of the building at least, so we would be in shadow for longer than we would have been on the other side. I backed up some stairs and stood next to the door under an overhang that wouldn't be much help to me. The sky was turning gray behind me. A car approached up the road, one that looked a lot like Morgan's Subaru at a distance. I hoped Ludwig was in the front seat, pointing and demanding that Morgan turn. I didn't have time to worry about it, as I needed to concentrate on my playing, but as the car came closer, it pulled into the parking lot, a green Subaru Outback containing many people. As it came to a stop, Ludwig jumped out and ran over. He raced up the stairs and pulled on the door. It was locked. I stepped aside and kept playing. More Paganini, and Morgan and Destiny got out of the car, as did the pets. The cats jumped onto Freddy's back, and he trotted over towards the warehouse. Ludwig pulled and then glanced around. He ran down the stairs and returned with a piece of scrap metal and wedged it into the doorframe to lever the door open. It flew wide with a bang, followed by gunshots. Ludwig evaded faster than mortal eyes could see, and Freddy leaped over him with both cats still on his back. I glanced inside. The cats used Freddy as a battle platform to launch themselves at the gunman, and Freddy went for his throat. He screamed, and the gun clattered to the floor. I looked around, still playing. Morgan and Destiny appeared to have ducked at the sound of gunfire. I hoped they had at least. Ludwig stepped inside, cautious, and gestured. "This way." I entered the warehouse and willed Thomas and his thugs to follow me. Inside the warehouse, there was an area where the paneled roof had collapsed, leaving a large area open to the sky. In this area, someone had set up a wooden stake. A burning stake, as pictured in history books, set on a low pyre of wooden pallets and similar scrap. Next to this, there was a supply of rope and chains, all covered with a light layer of snow. To the side of this, under the roof, there were also pokers, chains, a fire pit, a gallows, a sturdy table with what appeared to be chains and a butcher knife placed on it, a chair with a strange metal pyramid on the seat, and handcuffs on the sides. I felt my bile rise at the sight, and I heard Thomas gag before I looked away and concentrated again on the music. I led Thomas into the courtyard and stood in the shadows, playing. He ended up stepping right up to the stake. The thugs also remained under the open sky, but the sun wouldn't harm them. At least, I was reasonably certain they weren't my kind. Ludwig took some rope and tied Thomas to the stake and secured him with the chains. His eyes were dark, cold. Then he frowned and said, "I'll see what's keeping Solomon." I played Scheherazade again. Ludwig returned, followed by Solomon, Destiny, and Morgan. Destiny opened her plastic bag and pulled out a syringe with a glass bottle. She pulled out a large dose of whatever was in the bottle and injected Thomas with it. His eyelids drooped. "What was that?" I asked. "Acepromazine," she said. "I considered xylazine, but city vets don't really have horse sedatives." There was a gunshot, the scent of iron with a faint floral scent, and Destiny collapsed. Blood pooled at her side and her shirt turned crimson. Behind her, one thug smirked and pointed the gun at me. I hadn't been aware of him. He'd been hiding behind a crate. "Destiny!" I started towards her. Thomas roared with rage and pulled drowsily against the bonds, and the two thugs rushed forward to help him. Ludwig shouted, "Keep playing!" So I kept playing, though it was hard to keep Thomas and the thugs spellbound with my mind on what was happening behind me. I consciously shut it out of my thoughts and focused entirely on my music, half hypnotized myself. I was so enthralled by my music that I missed the initial bits of smoke coming off Thomas. The sunlight hit the top of his head first, then angled downwards. Thomas didn't appear to notice either. He never reacted to bursting into flame. There was the horrible bright orange blaze, the blackening and withering flesh, and the smell of burning hair and cooking meat as he contracted into the pugilist stance. I willed myself to shut it out and played. I was vaguely aware of Ludwig beside me, watching Thomas burn with icy eyes. When Thomas died, I knew it. His attention left me. I stopped playing and stared in horror at the flames spreading over and down his body. I heard regurgitation and glanced over at the thugs. One thug fainted into a puddle of his own vomit. The other screamed and charged at me, raising the gun. Freddy lunged at his throat, knocking him over. His teeth drew blood, red spraying up towards the ceiling. Freddy's vampire, dog, both instincts took over, and he savaged the man's throat, drinking. I didn't stop him, even though I should have. Inanna trotted over to lap at a forming pond of blood. Ivan watched on, radiating feline, smug approval. I turned. Destiny was lying on the ground in a pool of her own blood, wincing. Solomon pressed his jacket against her hip, trying unsuccessfully to staunch the flow. I rushed over and took her hand, still clutching the loner violin in my other hand along with the bow. Was she dying? What should I do? Was being a vampire better than death? Was I the one to make that decision? I knew, deep down, that she would leave me for good if I did this without her permission, but I wasn't considering doing this for me. Destiny was a mother. Would she rather die than watch her daughter grow up into a woman? I genuinely didn't know, and I didn't know how to ask in a way that didn't feel manipulative. So much blood. "Doesn't your saliva have healing properties?" Morgan asked. Solomon blinked at Morgan. "Does it really?" He glanced over at Ludwig, who shrugged elegantly. I stared at Morgan, and then I stared at Solomon. "Would that be bad? Do we need to remove the bullet first?" Destiny reached over and squeezed my bow hand. "It's okay," she said, her voice soft and distant. "Okay? Okay that she was dying? No, that's not okay." My cheeks were wet, and I backed away from her. My hands were doing some sort of like they were about to tear at my hair. Part of me was afraid I would turn her if I lost control. "If you want me to." A shadow fell over us both. Ludwig stood over Destiny, eyebrow raised. "The time for prevarication is over." "Prevarication?" The outrage in her voice was such that I was certain that if she had been healthy enough to do so, she would have stood with her hands on her hips. I don't want to be a vampire. I've always said I don't want to be a vampire. She made a disgusted noise. Prevarication. Ludwig crossed his arms and stared at her, stern. Understand, my dear, that I cannot permit you to die, especially not at Thomas's hands. It would destroy your husband. I won't have that. Not again. Ludwig, no! I scooted forward. If that was what Destiny wanted, she knew she could ask for it. Ludwig made the gesture at me and said, "Silence." I froze, still clutching the violin and the bow. I tried to protest, but found I couldn't. I struggled to lift the violin, but was unable. He was trying to help, I was certain of that, but my wife had made her wishes known. I didn't want her to die, and if she did, part of me would resent her not choosing to become a vampire instead. But that was her choice to make, not mine or Ludwig's. I wanted Destiny to be who and what she wanted to be, and I was grateful for however much time I had with her. "It's unnecessary," Solomon said. "It's only a scratch. We need to stop the bleeding and maybe get her some blood. I'll bet you have some at home." "She needs the emergency room," Morgan said. "We can't," Ludwig said. "We'd have to explain why Thomas was after us and what happened to him. And then the psych unit would come, as they wouldn't believe us, if they didn't arrest us for his murder." He shook his head. "Better to burn the building down, as you suggested." I stood, but still couldn't raise the violin or speak. "We have a doctor, we have a nurse, I'm a vet. I'll bet you have blood at home." Destiny tried to sit up. Ludwig frowned. "I have a nosy doorman as well." Solomon rolled his eyes. "One who was told to feed the pets raw chicken liver puree fresh from the blender if we returned late." I couldn't have phrased it better myself. I supposed vampires were one thing, but gunshot wounds were another. "Touché." I reached out and laid my hand on Ludwig's shoulder. He turned his head to look at me, and I shook my head. He sighed and turned back to Destiny. "Very well. As long as you do nothing gauche, like try to die, we'll do it your way." Destiny sighed in relief. I was surprised to realize that I was also relieved. I still wanted her to live forever, but it was more important to me now that she lived the life she wanted to live on her own terms. "Morgan," I said, realizing that I could speak, "can you pull the car closer?" "We brought those foil space blankets," Destiny said, "to keep the sun off." Morgan left, clutching her keys. Ludwig made a face and muttered, "So much drama to avoid the precious gift of immortality." We ignored him. Morgan rushed back in, carrying the foil blankets, which we all tossed over ourselves and rushed to the car. We rode back to Ludwig's place with Destiny in my lap, her head on my shoulder. When we arrived, I carried her upstairs. Solomon cleaned and bandaged her wound, and Morgan gave her a pint of Ludwig's finest O-negative. And then she slept, and I went into the other room where Bridget had Miriam. "Da-da-da-da-da-da," she said, weepy. She wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. "It's all right." I kissed her soft little cheek. "I won't let anything happen to you." I had my family back. It was everything I wanted. Well, almost everything I wanted. It might have been time to have a career again. My immediate instinct was to change all our names and move, of course. I'd discuss it with everyone in the morning, including my accountant Dave, to see if they agreed. I suspected that the story, "We were going to burn a Jew at the stake, but he hypnotized us with his violin and burned our leader instead, and his dog killed my friend," wouldn't hold up in court. But it might not bode well for Freddie. Perhaps Ludwig could fix that if it came to that. We'd see.
Destiny. Manhattan, New York. December 16th, 2021. Getting shot sucks, by the way. If that was a scratch, I'd hate to get the full effect. But I would live. I could have my second baby. And I didn't have to drink blood and hide from the sun and quit the vet clinic and fur kids. I lay in Ludwig's fancy-schmancy bed, getting O-negative blood and holding Bridget's hand with Miriam next to me. I'd had a moment where my life had passed before my eyes and a thought had popped into my head. Don't worry, Abraham. I'll find you. After all, I did it before. I will always find you. At the moment when I thought I might die, I knew I was Flora. My childhood nightmares were her traumatic memories. I wondered if I should tell Abraham. I didn't think he believed in reincarnation, and he might find the remark hurtful if he didn't, so I'd keep it to myself for the time being. Maybe I'd share my suspicions later. Even Ludwig's attempt to be helpful, hadn't frightened me like it would have before I'd had my odd vampire dreams. But the mortal life is best. I'd take the mortal, finite length and limits if it meant that I could keep the mortal meaning. Birth, death, rebirth. The circle is open but unbroken. As the song says, we all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return, like a drop of rain flowing to the ocean. We were going to be all right.
Abraham, Manhattan, New York, December 16th, 2021. Destiny slipped in Ludwig's guest room with Miriam curled up next to her. I kissed Destiny on the cheek and Miriam on the forehead and tucked them both in. Then I left the guest room. The penthouse was silent. Freddie was sitting outside the guest room as if he was guarding it, and Inanna and Ivan had curled up on either side of him. They watched me leave with preternaturally intelligent eyes. I sidled over to Ludwig. He was staring out his giant windows over the night city with a glass of wine in his hand. The UV shades had all been raised, but he'd left the lamps off. There were glittering lights spread out as far as the eye could see, except for a gigantic square of dark with curved lights across it that was Central Park. I glanced over at him. "Are you all right?" Ludwig started. Of course. Why do you—" "Please." I patted his shoulder and made deliberate eye contact. Ludwig averted his eyes. "I don't know why he said the things he did. I don't— You know, he said them to be hurtful," I said. "But I'm not— I don't want you to think that I—" I pulled him into a hug. He relaxed in my arms, letting out a deep sigh. We stood like that for a moment. Then I pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "You're the best friend I've ever had. I know you well enough that I can say with some confidence that nothing would make me think less of you." Every word was true, and every word was essential for him to hear. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then opened them again. He nodded silently and hugged me again. I patted his back and squeezed him closer. We stood like that for a while, with him slowly relaxing into the hug and placing his chin on my shoulder. I wondered if I should mention that I myself was not entirely straight. Would that be helpful? Perhaps I shouldn't make this moment about me. After a few minutes at least, he finally pulled away. "I'm all right," he said. "Would you like a glass of wine?" I smiled and held up a hand to decline. We stood like that for a while, side by side, staring out over the city together. Then I asked, "How did I do that?" "Do what?" I rolled my eyes. "The thing with the violin." He tilted his head at me. "It's your gift. You did it to me under the bridge, don't you remember?" "What?" I shook my head. Ludwig sighed, looking chagrined. "Clearly, I am Sire of the Year." I stifled a laugh at his expression. "It's your gift. You've dedicated your life to the violin, and that passion, the change, enhanced your gift. We all have gifts based on our passions in our mortal lives." He frowned. You really didn't know. I assumed Flora had told you our lore. I think she assumed you told me. I stared out over the city. I usually deferred to her in vampire matters. Right. He took a sip of alcohol. I'll tell you everything I've told Solomon then. He glanced over at his glass of wine. After a few more of these, he sighed. If you ever want to tell me what he did to you, I'm willing to listen. Ludwig gave me a sharp look, appraising. Then he relaxed and said, Not at this time. I wondered about Ludwig's gifts. I considered his ability to track other vampires, and to pass himself and others off as someone else, and his clever, intricate, perfect forged documents, and his unerring ability to find the most valuable object in the room. Then I wondered about what he'd done in his mortal life to earn such gifts.
Ludwig, Manhattan, New York, December 16th, 2021. Abraham's declaration. It was as close as he could get to saying that whether I was what moderns call gay or not, he wouldn't think less of me and would continue to be my friend. I know it's a cliché to say it lifted the weight of the world from my shoulders, but they felt notably lighter for his saying it. I was still uncertain whether I wished to apply modern labels to my feelings, and what labels I would use if I did, but I wouldn't lose Abraham over it. I was also uncertain what purpose it would serve. Abraham was married. I still didn't want sex, but I wanted all the other things that came with marriage. Commitment, sharing a life, cuddles. Was I, as the moderns phrased it, repressed? I had killed again, but I had avenged the poor priest that Thomas forced me to kill in 1762. I would continue to pray for his soul, nevertheless.
Abraham, Manhattan, New York, December 17th, 2021. Ludwig's kitchen was, unsurprisingly, empty. The enormous stainless steel refrigerator contained some blood bags, some containers of bloody chicken livers for the pets, a carafe of blood, pig, cow, aardvark, and that was all. I set out for groceries. When Destiny awakened, I made coffee and eggs and toast for 3. He had no toaster, so I had to use the oven. He owned a coffee maker, but I had to rinse dust out of the carafe before using it. Ludwig had no high chair, but I put Miriam on my lap, and we sat with a bowl so she could eat dried Cheerios with her fingers, or at least play with them. She'd nursed earlier. The Cheerios were more so she would feel included. The mortals ate silently, and I wondered if I was the first person to cook on this stove. When they finished eating, I asked, "So, how do you feel about changing our names and moving?" Bridget raised an eyebrow. "I like my name," Destiny said. "I have a life here." I nodded. I'd expected that. "Well," I said, "I might want to perform again, and we might end up needing to move to the city for that, if that's all right with you. We'll see how I handle the commute." Destiny beamed and squeezed my hand. Ludwig looked like he might dance a jig. "We'll figure it out," she said. Abraham, Manhattan, New York, December 17th, 2021. The news talked about a bizarre cult murder, but once they identified the victim as the man who'd led the hate march, they assumed it was an inside job by extremist elements, even more extremist elements, in his own organization. Either way, they weren't looking for vampires or vampire pets. The maid was named Maria Lopez. I called Dave as soon as I saw her on the television. "How much money can I give someone before they have to pay taxes on it?" $15,000, he replied with a promptness that spoke of his familiarity with tax law. "Okay," I said. "I'd like to send Maria Lopez, the one on television right now, $15,000. There was a pause. "Do I want to ask?" "I hear she has a baby and a sick mother." After another moment, Dave said, "Okay." On the television, Maria said, "When they were distracted by the man, I took the van and escaped. I hope he's all right." We would be fine.
You've been listening to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, and I'm your host and author, Catherine Villiard. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happened next, and please rate the podcast to help other people find it. See you next time, and remember, becoming a vampire is a thing that can just happen to you, but being a monster is a choice.